In this video, we're going to be talking about intersections of lines and intersections of planes, and what happens when those things don't intersect as well. So first off, an intersection of lines occurs where two or more lines cross or touch, and that always happens at a single point. So whenever you name the intersection of lines, you're just naming a single point using a capital letter. So this line GH is crossing line LK at point P. We can say that using symbols. Line GH intersects line LK at point P. We could have an infinite number of lines all intersecting. They will only cross at a single point, though. Planes intersect in a slightly different way. An intersection of planes occurs where two planes cross or touch along a segment or a line. And in real life, we can think of it as like an edge. So where does the top of a box come together with the side of a box? Well, along an edge, right? So we'll name intersections of planes using lines. We can do it a couple of different ways. Remember that planes are named by using a lowercase letter if it's given to us in the diagram. So this plane M is intersecting this plane N right here where they're touching or coming together at line L. So even though in the diagram it may look like this is just a segment, we have to imagine that these planes are extending forever in all directions, and this line is extending in both directions forever. So this is touching along this whole entire line if it's extending. We can also name planes a slightly different way. If we're given points instead of lowercase letters, we can name planes using 3 out of those points that are on the plane. So plane MAN, MA and N are on this horizontalish plane. So that's the plane being described by that name. Plane QAP is describing this verticalish plane because those 3 points are on the plane. So that's enough to name that plane or identify it. So plane MAN is intersecting plane QAP along this entire line AB. So again, even though it looks like a segment, these planes are extending forever in all directions as well as this intersection. So it's a line AB. What happens when things don't intersect? Well, when lines don't intersect, they're called parallel lines. The tricky thing about parallel lines is that they have to be coplanar in order to fit this definition. And we'll talk more about that when we see a more complicated drawing. But right off the bat, AB and CD, these two lines, they won't ever cross, so they are known as parallel. Parallel lines hopefully remind us of railroad tracks. We never want our tracks to cross, otherwise we'd have a bunch of train wrecks. So line AB is parallel to line CD. That's how we would say it in words. In symbols, we read it the exact same way. This symbol that looks kind of like 2 vertical lines or 2 railroad tracks or a pause button on the remote maybe, that is the symbol for parallel. So we read this the exact same way. Line AB is parallel to line CD. Skew lines are the craziest of lines. They are lines that are not anything we've talked about. So they are lines that are not parallel and they do not intersect. And they must also lay on or lie on different planes. The only way they're not going to be parallel and not intersect is if they're on different planes. Maybe you're thinking that we just talked about parallel lines are lines that don't intersect. Skew lines are not parallel. So even though we're looking for lines that are not intersecting, we're also not looking for parallel lines. So it's everything else. One technique you can use when you're trying to find skew lines is just put a little X on any line that's intersecting or parallel, and then anything that doesn't have an X is probably going to be skew. So let's take a look at this diagram. We're focused on line AB. So what would be skew with this line? Well, it can't be parallel so it can't be CD or GH. And also can't intersect, so it can't be AD or BC. So what else do we have? Well, CF, that will not intersect. Even though it looks like it, we have to imagine that this is a three-dimensional figure. And this plane right here in the front is not going to intersect. Well, I'm sorry, this line on this plane in the front is not going to intersect this line on the plane on the right. So CF is definitely a skew line. DE is also a skew line. And one unique property of a skew line is that if it is skew, any line that it's parallel would also be skew. So CF and DE are both skew lines. There are a few more in there, but we'll name that down here in the examples. So we'll use that same figure or diagram to answer some more practice questions. Name two lines that are parallel to line BC. So here's line BC up the top. We could think of line BC as either being on the top plane or the bottom plane. So parallel has to be on the same plane. So what's going the same direction on the top? Well, line GF is one of them. And if we think about BC being on the front plane here, then what would be parallel or going the same direction on the front plane? Well, line AD. So line AD and line GF would be considered parallel to line BC. Name the intersection of line GF and line EF. Intersections of lines are sometimes pretty easy because you can just tell in the name the point that they share is their intersecting point. So point F would be the intersection, but we can verify that by looking at the picture. Line GF is in the back on the top here. Line EF is on the side here, and they're definitely coming together or touching right here at point F. Another example, name the intersection of plane BCD and plane CFE. So let's try and find the planes first. What 3 points, or where are these 3 points located? B, C, and D. B, C, and D seem to be on the front plane, so that's the plane being described there. Points C, F, and E seem to be on the right plane here. So where does the front of this box come together with the right side of the box? Well, they're touching right here along this whole edge, or line CD. You could also say line DC, that would be okay. So planes touch along an edge or a line. Line BA is skew with what other 4 lines? So here we're going to talk about all the possible skew lines in this diagram. Here's line BA. Line CF is skew. It's not going to intersect. We talked about that. It's parallel. Line DE is also not going to intersect. They're on a different plane. What else, though? And let's look in the back plane. So HE back here is not going to intersect, and it's not parallel. And its parallel, GF, is also going to do the same. It's not going to intersect line AB, and it's also not parallel. So there are the 4 skew lines in that diagram. So there was an introduction to intersections of lines and planes, and a little bit about what happens when they don't intersect.